Okay, so it's actually from earlier in your lecture today. You were talking about the reality and infinity, and you said something about reality is not infinity or it's not infinite. And I was curious if you could elaborate on the relationship between what you understand in terms of between reality and infinity.
Okay. Real systems are finite. Okay, all real systems are finite. You cannot have a real system that's infinite. Infinity is a mathematical abstraction. Infinity is the number that's larger than the largest number. You know, it's, if you can think of the largest number that you can imagine and you raise that number to the exponent of itself, that's still just a number, it's not infinity. Infinity is the thing that's impossible to get to. It's just a conceptual abstraction. It doesn't really exist. There is no such thing as some real thing that's infinite. So all real things have to be finite. So when we look at this consciousness system, well, this is a huge consciousness system. Our whole reality here is just one speck. So we think that it has to be pretty massive just to generate the data for this universe. But this universe is just a small part of the larger reality. So we think of it as being infinite because relative to us and our way of seeing things, it appears infinite. It is so big that it seems like it's infinite. And in that way, it's effectively kind of, my analogy was that if you're floating in an inner tube in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, you think the ocean is infinite. It appears to be infinite. There seems to be no end to it in any direction. But that's sort of the way it is with us. But the ocean is not infinite. It's finite. It's just big. And this is the same way.
You're talking about tangible reality. You're not talking about intangible reality, like the feelings of love that's eternal, which is infinite.
I'm not feeling about intangible. I'm talking about the consciousness system. Okay? When you say it's infinite, you're using infinity as a metaphor. You don't really mean it's infinite in the way that a mathematician thinks of the word infinite. Remember, I'm a physicist, and I tend to think of things in mathematical context. Infinite is a metaphor for something that appears to be beyond and forever, to the infinite. But that's just a metaphor that we use. It's not a description of a real system.
Therefore, spirit is finite.
The larger consciousness system of which we are a part, okay, is a finite system. It's an evolving system, and we're a part of it. Again, the infinite, this concept of infinity is a metaphor. It's just the way we express something that is beyond our capacity to understand, and with time scales that go beyond our ability to conceive of. We just say, well, then it's infinite. But that doesn't work when you're a physicist trying to develop a system that then you can explain and how that system works and what it does. If you say it's an infinite system, you immediately have all kinds of problems.
You've answered my question, but I'm going to consider it.
Good. That's all you should do. Okay? Yes, Chris.
Tom, when I was a little boy, I had an experience of observing myself behaving like my father, and in doing so I kind of stepped back from that personality and observed myself when I was about 3 or 4 years old. And later on I also saw myself behaving like my mother, and I came to the awareness that the personality that I used to be operating from when I was younger was a combination of my mother and father, and that was the image I had of myself. I seem to have outgrown that now, and it's got to the point now where I feel almost like I am the person I was before I was born. This is like an experience I'm having and have had for the last couple of years. Is it possible to just keep progressing now, and because I want to keep taking it further and further? Like I really feel I'm the self I was before I met my parents. Almost like that Zen koan, what did your face look like before you met your parents? It's applicable to my personality now. And I want to, what I'm saying is, when you spoke about life after death, if this becomes a dream and it's like it's fading, and you become more the person you are in terms of fundamental substance. Those are my words.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a goal? Is this an experience that a lot of people have? if they get deeply involved in self-knowledge?
Yes, but they may not express it just as with the same metaphors that you did. Okay, in your experience, you saw the connectedness to parents and basically what you took from them. You know, we do that. They're our role models. You know, we copy our parents, and you could see that, and then you could see you growing away from that. That you were not just, you know, duplication of your parents, but you were somebody else besides.
Yes.
And I think that's something that we all experience, but we don't necessarily experience it with the metaphors that you experienced. You kind of almost got that in a physical sense. You could see the separation and how you were connected. So yes, I think we all kind of go through that, a part of self-discovery, but sometimes it's not as dramatic or as right up front where you can see it as your experience. But yes, when you leave this reality frame, then this reality frame begins to fade. It just fades like a dream. And you are then you're in a different virtual reality frame. You have less constraints. The physics is more open. There's more things you can do. And when you're in a different frame, you have different experiences, different things you can be. So it's really not even good to compare it to this frame. It's just different. You're just in a different reality frame altogether. And there's things you can do there and be there that are very hard to do and be here. Just like in your dreams. You can do things in your dreams that are just real hard to do here. But the dream state and these other reality states after you die, they are all reality frames that are constructed for your education, for your ability to grow. They all have their specific values and uses. When you're in that dream state, you're still learning, you're still growing. You know, I tell people, you know, it's a work. You know, you work while you're awake and you work while you're asleep, but your consciousness, and basically you have no days off. You are growing, you are experiencing, you're processing that experience, you're making decisions, whether it's in your dreams or here, and you grow or evolve or de-evolve based on the quality of those decisions you make. So you're constantly being challenged. You're constantly having to express your intent in action and then get the results of that expression. And that's just in all the reality frames. So when you get out of this frame, you die here, your body goes away and you're no longer attached to this frame. You're in another frame, but it's sort of the same old drill. You're still working. You're just working in a totally different framework. It's not like this, so it's very hard to compare. You have different goals, different things you're doing, but it's still all toward the same underlying purpose.
That's the way I feel right now, not as far as my physical body goes, but in terms of, I felt like I shed a skin or something, like I'm no longer operating like my mother and father did. In order for me to be able to see that, it was like I took contact lenses off each eye. One contact lens was my mother, one was my father, and now I have a perspective which is totally transformed from when I was younger, and where I can see it. Yeah. I'm not looking out from it anymore, in other words.
Right. You know, we start out when we're born here, and we have kind of one foot in the non-physical, again, just a viewpoint, and one in the physical. By the time we get to be 7 years old, we kind of let go of our connection to the non-physical. You know, 5-year-olds have invisible playmates and have out of bodies all the time. You know, it's a very natural thing. By the time they're 7 or so, they let that go, because by then they're socialized to the point that they know that that's silly, and their belief system starts to shut it down. They start getting beliefs about what's real and what's not. And then we have to become all over again. You know, we have to basically start from scratch. And when we do that, we're always in a search to find ourselves, you know, to become us once again. And as you grow up, you are a reflection of your parents in a lot of ways. And then you outgrow that. You have to be more. And that more is more of the real you as you grow. And then that real you changes too. That's not going to be a real you that's always like that forever. That real you is in a state of flux as well, and it's changing. And next year, your real you will be a different you, because you'll have that much more experience behind you. But yes, it's just a growth process of becoming yourself and then evolving from there. And we have lots of things that come to us that kind of constrain us. You know, parents might be one, beliefs, cultures, religions, all that stuff are constraints. And we have to work through all those belief systems so that we can be ourselves and grow. Because otherwise we're just, we're not making our own decisions. Yes?
So there's past, then the unactualized past, and the probable future, and present. And you can visit any of those.
Yeah.
How do you know which one you're in? How do we know right now we're not stuck in visiting a probable past?
Well, the way you get to know which one you're in is by a lot of practice, and it's because you get around in those databases with your intent. You notice when we went through these exercises, sometimes your intent was clearer and sometimes it was less. You know, it tends to come and go. You learn that with meditation and with practice to stabilize your mind, get rid of the chatter, make it so that it's perfectly under your control and it's stable and it's solid and it's focused. Once you can do that, then you can control that intent. So if you want to go into one database or another, then that's where you are. You know, you intend that, so that's what happens. Intent is what moves consciousness. If your intent is flighty, like most people, it is, that's just kind of normal for us here, you don't know. You never do know, because your mind is flitting here and flitting there, and in the middle of while you're working on somebody, some other thought comes up, and you're gone, and you forget about the rest of the body, so they don't have thumbs, so you never see that. That's your intent is not real stable unless you practice enough to get it stable. So most people don't know. So you'd say, how do we know? Well, if you haven't practiced a long time, and if you haven't made your mind and your consciousness a very steady tool that you can kind of precisely focus, then it's very hard to know. There's no signs that said, entering, the future probable reality, that lets you know that that's where you are. That's why people, when they do these excursions, when they travel in a larger reality, they come back with such strange stories, and a lot of it, doesn't make sense to them. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to anybody, but that's because maybe they were in a completely different reality frame that didn't take place. Well, it was sort of like this, but none of these things fit. Well, they were in a probable database that wasn't actualized. So there's a lot of strange things in the precognitive dreams. People don't know that, they don't set out to have a precognitive dream. They just happen to rattle around and get into that reality frame. It's almost random. If you go to Google, there's a little button you push that says, "Are you feeling lucky?" And it just gives you a random, it just gives you a random shot into the database and pulls out something. Well, it's sort of like that. If you don't focus, but you have an intent to go explore, then you end up almost anywhere.
How do you know you're on Google.com? What if you know how you can be hijacked, and it looks like you type in Google.com, but you get hijacked to Google.
Yeah, you don't.
Like what I'm looking for is the baseline. Like, how do you know? How did you come to that term where, okay, I know this is real, this is the baseline, and then started?
The only way to get there is through a lot of experimentation. It's not just experience, because you can have experience, and that experience can be anything, like you say, and you don't know whether you've been hijacked or not. Well, you actually aren't hijacked, you hijack yourself. It's your lack of control that hijacks yourself. But the way you do that is you have to do some sort of experimentation with the things that you can control. Now, you don't have ability to do experiments everywhere, but you do have ability to do experience with this physical reality and the non-physical reality and how it relates to this reality. And if you do enough of that, so you build confidence in what works, what doesn't, what's functioning, then that confidence is, you kind of extrapolate that into the larger picture. We do that all the time. You cannot experience everything, but you experience enough that you can kind of extrapolate that experience to the bigger picture. There's no way going out into those other, those, you know, I say we're in division, and there's other places. There's no way to actually go out there and do experiments. You have to do experiments that you can check here, like your healing, like your remote viewing, like those kinds of things, where you go into future states and see if that happens, where you go into past states and see if you can collect information that then you can verify here, and things like that. And once you collect enough data, that's how you build your confidence that you're actually doing something real. Up until that time, you have no idea whether you're just making it up or whether it's something real. And to get to that point just takes a lot of time and a lot of experimentation. Like I say, you need to heal 50 people, and you need not to just sit down and do it in 30 seconds like we did. You need to, spend time at it. The way you actually are effective with your healing is you do what we did 5 or 6 times a day for 2 weeks. You keep working on it. It's not something that you just, casually fire off once and then you're done. You'll have a little effect that way, but you'll have much more effect if you work on it continually.
Should you tell them or not tell them?
It doesn't, well, it depends. That's up to you. You have to know when you're interfering and when you're helping. It is not your point to go alter other people's existences. You're not here. Those are not your decisions to make. People are here and on paths for their own reasons. And, pain is a good teacher. Illness and disease can be a good teacher. Survival is not what we're here for. We're here to learn. So, we all think that death is an awful thing and needs to be avoided if best we can. Everybody needs to be healed and that sort of thing, but that's not true. You have to have respect for other people. And as a novice, if you try to heal someone who really needs that illness or who, is ready to go or whatever, what'll happen is it just won't work, because you will give them, you will move them a little bit this way and they'll just put it right back because that's the track they're on. So as a novice, you don't have to worry about it too much because you're not going to be that strong to actually be jerking people around in ways that interfere with their life. So I wouldn't worry too much at the novice level. But if you get to the point where you can move things around enough to alter people's paths, then you have to be very careful that if you do that it's a good thing to do. And the only way to know that is if you can go to the larger reality and find out how it gets affected, if that's a good thing to do. If you're wrong, you'll find out because you will be stymied. You do things that'll be put back. The system is working against you. If you feel like it's an uphill battle, it's probably because you're pushing on something that you should leave alone. So that's generally how you make that sort of decision. If you're doing something that is really good for you to do, it's really going to help. It's going to lower the entropy of the system. You'll find that everything's facilitated for your effort. Everything just works. So that's sort of the way. But you can tell those sorts of things. The more skill you have, the better able you are to assess. And what's important isn't just an individual's entropy, whether you're helping an individual. It's whether or not everyone attached to that individual and yourself. It's a system. You have to look from a system perspective, because sometimes that individual is going through what they're going through because of the effect it's having on others. So you help that individual and maybe you keep 5 others from learning what they need to learn, and you're interfering again. So the point isn't to make people feel good. That's not the point of our existence. The point of our existence is to learn and grow, and for the most part, meddling is a bad idea. And the more capable you are to make changes, the less changes that you tend to make. You tend to leave it alone. You don't bother with it. But it's a real good incentive for beginners to work with and to learn, and they're not really going to do much harm anyway. And by the time you grow up enough to where you could do harm, you'll know better. So I mostly say don't worry about it too much. It's not something you have to be real careful with, but just kind of pay attention to your intuition. Your intuition will sometimes tell you leave it alone. So just pay attention to that intuition. Sometimes your intuition will encourage you to keep working at it.
Do you spend much time scoping out your own personal future probabilities? And if so, what types of things are you looking for?
And the answer to that is no. So the answer to the second question is easy. No, I don't. And the reason I don't is pretty much for the same reason we're talking about. It's not only not good to interfere in other people's lives, it's not good to interfere in your own life. We're all here to learn, to have experiences. If you start manipulating your experiences, you ruin your opportunity to learn and grow. It's like you no longer are in this situation where things happen and you have to deal with them and you have to interact. That's how you meet challenges and grow. If everything becomes scripted, well, I know that a rock's going to fall over there, so I'll walk over here. Then you eliminate those opportunities to learn. So it's basically shooting yourself in the foot. Again, the point isn't to have a happy, life full of wealth and good things happening all the time. We may think that's the point. We may wish that was what the point was, but that's not it. So you just get in your own way. And what happens is if you expend your energy routinely on those kinds of things, you start to lose your access. So that's, it's not a good thing to do. So no, I never look. I don't worry about it. A long time ago at Monroe's, people were interested in looking at the future, and we were doing studies about that and what would happen. We were trying to read headlines, a week ahead of time, and a lot of things like that to collect data to verify that it could be done and what percentage of the time could it be done. And we've done a whole lot of that. And at the time, back in the 70s, there was a lot of fear in the land about big earth changes and so on, and we investigated all of that. So, I've been there and done that sort of thing, but I really haven't done that for 30 years, and I have really no interest in it. You see, it doesn't matter that much. When you think physical and you believe that the point is to survive, right, and live a long life and avoid problems, and if there's going to be a big earthquake, you need to be someplace else, you got the wrong focus. It's not about surviving. It's about growing. Survival's not an issue, and it's just a chapter in a book. There's another chapter after this one, and it doesn't really matter that much. So you kind of have a different attitude toward death, a different attitude toward what's important and what's not. And survival is, let that take care of itself. Not that big an issue. Ron?
After this reality frame, have you, I know Robert Monroe talked about what he wanted to do, what his next step is after he was done here, about being a higher end being. Have you ever thought about that? Or if you're going to hit the replay button? Or?
No, I let that take care of itself. That'll all work itself out when I get there. There's just no point in trying to second guess those things. What you learn, the more you go down this path, you learn to live in the moment. Your existence is now, in the present, and you just live here in the present. You let the future take care of itself, and the past is there to learn from, maybe to revisit and learn some, but it's not significant. You shed no tears over the past, you take on no guilt over the past, and you grow from it, and you don't worry about the future. You let all that go. You will be where you need to be and how you need to be when you get there. So at this point, trying to make a plan is, the cart leading the horse. There's no point. Everything changes. Any plan you make here is not a good plan. It's just not going to be the way it is because everything's going to change. And there's just no point. So no, the future, I let it take care of itself. I just live here in the present moment from moment to moment.
Do you see these ideas in your book even being more mainstream with the scientific community in the future? Having more younger physicists and all that explore it more?
I do see that in the future it is going to be more acceptable. Particularly writings like that Brian Whitworth is doing. He's publishing scientific papers and scientific articles in journals and things that do that. That's going to catch a lot more attention. But then once he catches that attention, so he's not talking about consciousness. Consciousness is never a word he talks about because if he talked about that, he just stepped outside of the scientific interest. If he talks about point and meaning and and that sort of content, he's outside of science, nobody's interested. So he's keeping it strictly inside the lines of, this set of assumptions of a virtual reality actually works better. We can do better physics with it. And here's how you derive space, and here's how you derive time, and that sort of thing. I think that is going to catch on because it's true. It works. The digital physicists kind of figured out part of the problem. Einstein figured out part of the problem, and there's a lot of motion there. They've been trying to unify quantum mechanics and relativity for 60 years and have failed. They've had a lot of attempts. Well, here's something that unifies them just fine. It's not the toe they were looking for. They wanted some objective, mathematical thing, and it turns out to be, consciousness, turns out to be a virtual reality and all this weird stuff. But then, physics is about weird stuff most of the time. And I think eventually physicists are going to accept that as a better physics, just because it's demonstrable. They have a lot of beliefs to overcome. There's this huge inertia to overcome, so it isn't going to happen quick. I mean, look, Darwin was back, 1850 or something, and, people are still arguing about it, now. So if you want to know how long it takes for big ideas, to work their way into the society, it takes a long time. But I don't think this one will take that long. And then once physics gets comfortable with virtual reality being a better physics, the next step to, like Fredkin said, where's it come from? Other. Where's it computed? Other. Well, the next step to consciousness is the computer, is I think about as obvious as you can get. So I believe then, after Brian is done, I think then they'll probably move on into my direction where they'll see that consciousness is the only answer to that question of where's other? What is other? And at that point, yes, I think we will. This will end up being more mainstream. But right now, we're way out on the fringe. But there are physicists that take it seriously. There's a lot of people in digital physics that take this sort of thing physically. Stan?
I recall a picture once looking at Star Trek Next Generation. Picard had gone up, a couple of other officers flipped the switch and looked at virtual reality on the holodeck. They'd seen what they wanted to see, flipped the switch off, that physical reality vanished. Now, with respect to human memory, is our memory totally within us, or is it distributed? We may have the bulk of it personally. Does the big computer have a chunk, or is what we have in the big computer anyway? Who can read and write into it? Is it shieldable, needed to, whatever?
Okay, we are, as some of those questions are unknown, at least I don't know the answers to them, but we are a subset of information. And we do have some control over that information. We can keep other information out. If someone wants to heal you and you don't want to be healed, you can basically keep that from happening. Someone sends you bad energy, you can keep that from happening. So you have some control over the interface. You don't have to accept all the data that's sent to you. Other people can reject the data that you send to them as well. So yes, you have some control over it, but now whether that data is in, how that data is written, whether that's in one spot or distributed in other spots, I don't know, and it probably doesn't matter much. Like when you write a file on your hard drive, there's pieces of that file strung all over your hard drive. That's why we have to defragment, because our stuff gets spread all over, but it still works. It's all there. It's all one document. It's not like your document's broken or anything. It's all there. It's just spread around. So whether or not we are kind of spread out or have the data all collected in one spot, in the bigger reality, there's no such thing as place or spots or space, and spread out really doesn't mean anything. So it's hard to answer that question. It's just there. It's just a part of the consciousness system, and we control some of it. Some of it we don't. Sometimes things intrude on us. A lot of our dreams are given to us. It's not something that we manufacture. There are those entities. We talk about guides, and maybe that's something that kind of comes in here too, is that a guide is just the larger consciousness system trying to help us out. It's like the help offered. we make it into a physical or a sort of a non-physical being that's working with us because that's our metaphor. That's how we interpret those kinds of things, because we see everything as, if it communicates with us, then it must be a being. If it's a being, it must be human like us. It's just that it doesn't live here, it's in the other reality, so then we turn this into a guide. And that guide may be consistent, have personality, all those things are true, but it's just an art, it's a metaphor for how the larger system works with us to help us improve. And a lot of the dreams that you have are kind of delivered to you by your guides, if you will. They're custom made to give you experiences that you need to grow. Sometimes tests to see how fearful you are, whether you're ready for the next step, that sort of thing. So we get a lot of that kind of working with us, if you will, from the larger system. We're not just alone to kind of sink or swim here. We get a lot of help. But whether we're distributed all over or not, I don't know, because all over is a very problematic concept where you have no space. It's just data.
It seemingly doesn't matter, because with thoughtful, well-focused intent, we have access to anything anywhere. So
Right.
It doesn't matter where it is.
Access, exactly. All consciousness is netted. It's just like there's this huge internet, all the consciousness is netted. And not only in our end division, but all over, all consciousness is netted, because we're just all part of the same thing. And the communication, intent is what addresses the envelope and stamps it. Intent is what sends. Intent is what retrieves. Intent is the motivator, is the motive force, if you will, in consciousness. Intent's the active ingredient. So yeah, we're all netted. It doesn't really matter, because we're all kind of connected in that way. So we are all one thing, all connected to each other. And we trade information all the time at a level that has nothing to do with body language or with verbal language. That information's flowing around that net all the time. And your intent is like your URL. You intend to go look at a particular web page, you click that URL and that takes you to it. Well, it's the same way with your intents, like clicking on a URL. That's how we just did this healing, with our intent.
Of the 6 billion people on the planet, how many do you think really know we have a time machine in our head?
I don't know. Hard to say how many people get that, but time is something that we can control. And then the next exercises we do at the end of tomorrow, we're going to actually travel back in time and into the future to help do this healing. We're going to do it in context of a healing process. We're going to go back to the beginning of the illness and work on it there. Sometimes that's what you have to do. You sometimes get to, I've had healing problems sometimes where they were so far gone that there really wasn't anything you could do now. You had to go back before the problem started at a time when there was actually time to do something and do it there, and then it changes it here. So sometimes, time is a necessary variable to, and sometimes you want to know the effect of what you're doing. So you'll look at a paraplegic who's got an inch gap in his spinal cord, and you want to know, what's this person going to be doing a year from now, 2 years, 5 years, and you can progress time. If you go 10 years into the future and you see that they're walking not well, but they're actually up and walking and moving their hands, then that gives you some sense of what you can do to work on them, to help, and the things that you should be doing, the encouragement you should be giving, because you don't want to go in there and say, oh, just keep trying, and you know that it's just not going to work out, because that's not the plan. So you have to kind of look ahead. So yeah, the future is a thing that you can. You're just looking at probabilities. You're not looking at done deals, but you can manipulate time like you can anything else. It's just intent. It's all there in the databases. So it's not, people have this idea that there is no time and there is no time in the larger reality, and that's not true. There is time. Time is a fundamental part of consciousness. It's just that all these databases all exist, and you can go into the future one or the past one or the unactualized or actual anytime you want to. So they're all available at the same time. It makes reality look like it's all simultaneous, but it's not really. If you don't have time, you don't have growth. You can't have change if you don't have time. You have to have a before and an after, or there's no growth. If there's no growth, then basically you're in a static, stagnant reality system. Nothing changes. So time is a fundamental part of reality. And it's just that changing state. It's that 1 and 0 flipping on and off that keeps the beat. And we have a time in this reality. The other realities have their own clock, their own metronome ticking. We don't all run on the same time, but we need time so that we can interact. We can't interact without time. You're just frozen. So you can't learn anything without time. But it is a variable. Yes.
So based on what you were speaking about, the ideas of focused intent, earlier you mentioned that every system has its own rules. So if one of our rules in this reality is that, if you walk up onto a cliff and you jump off, you obviously fall. But if somebody had the right focus and intent, can they manipulate that and fly? Well,
it depends. There's a few things that will change that. There is a rule called the psi uncertainty principle. If we talked about uncertainty. If there's enough uncertainty, you have room in there to modify the outcome. Okay. Also, the psi uncertainty principle is there to prevent the reality frame that we have from basically degenerating. Okay, if we had people, jumping up and flying around and doing other things, if the rule set didn't apply, then the rule set would kind of be variable. Sometimes there's gravity, sometimes they're not. You can do whatever you think, and so on. This would be a very mixed up place. It would start to get to the point that it would be hard to get this feedback and interaction, because nothing would be like as you expected. It needs to be kind of settled down and buttoned down before it makes a good learning environment. Just like if you go into an elementary school, the things they do with the children are very focused and very repetitive and one little step at a time, and that's the kind of reality, the kind of rules that you need in order to learn. So this psi uncertainty principle says that you can't violate the rule set in a way that it undermines the purpose of the whole reality system. Okay? So now what that means that if you want to do some big demonstration, if you call in all the news media and you want them to watch you levitate, at 100 feet in the air and do tricks, it's not going to work, even if you can do those in the privacy of your own room, because that's going to violate the psi uncertainty principle. Okay? If you are a psychic and you can tell what the numbers are on the lottery, you'll be able to maybe write down all the numbers on the lottery and they'll be just right unless you place a bet. And then it won't work. So it's that sort of a thing. It depends on the effect that it has. So has somebody ever at some time gotten to the edge of the cliff, jumped, and not fallen? Could be. Were all the media there to record it? No. You have to have uncertainty. That's what the psi uncertainty means. There has to be enough uncertainty that the rules have been broken to allow the rules to be broken. So that's why we only have the wiggle room in the margins of the uncertainty. There has to be enough uncertainty that the rule wasn't broken. Oh, well, that was just your imagination. No, that didn't really happen. Oh, the statistics just worked out that way. You just happened to be off 2 sigma or 3 sigma, not a big deal, that happens. It has to be in that range. But now what then tells you that there's something odd going on is that it just happens to be 3 sigma to the plus side 20 times in a row. You see, but the event itself has to be within explanation, normal explanation. Otherwise, you start to undermine the consistency of our reality, which is a problem. So that's the nature. So yes, very strange things can happen and have happened, but they usually happen to only a few people, and it's not very credible in the larger society, because otherwise it would cause a problem. So it remains uncertain whether or not that person floated off the cliff or not. It has to remain uncertain. Yes?
You mentioned that matter and space is more of it's virtual in our reality and more of a result from our rule set that governs this reality. Does energy and matter have a manifestation in other realities in a different way, like in the next?
Well, energy and matter are virtual. It's virtual energy and virtual matter. The other reality frames have matter. They have hard physical things that they deal with. There's other frames that are physical. I say physical, all that means is that the rule set has enough constraints in it to make things consistent where you get feedback like this one, and we call that physical. And there's various degrees of that, but yes, there's all of those, and they kind of have space and they have matter. And when you evolve these rules, remember the big digital bang. When you evolve these rules, you get a system that's workable as a learning lab, or you don't. If you get one that's got, you know, 4-dimensional space and you know, some kind of strange stuff going on that everything changes no matter, you know, whether you look at it today or tomorrow, that reality isn't functional. People can't learn in that. It's not steady enough. You need to have something steady so you can see the results of your actions and get the feedback. So those realities really don't persist. Those are the ones that you hit the delete button and say, well, let's see what else evolves. So those that exist and are out there and populated are those that kind of pass muster for being useful. You know, that's the way evolution is. The things that aren't useful go away. And so most of the realities out there aren't, you know, the physical realities aren't real different from this. Sure, the beings are different. There's a lot of things that are different. The physics isn't exactly the same, but they're pretty similar because this is what works. This is what produces a good learning lab. So there's more similarity in it than you might think. The differences tend to be more aesthetic and cultural than they are fundamental. Most of the fundamental stuff is still pretty much the same. So yes, there's matter and energy in other reality frames, and it's virtual there just like it's virtual here. It seems physical there just like it seems physical here. Now, we talk about energy, like we sent energy when we were healing, right? We sent this white light, this energy, and we dissolved those black spots. That energy is just a metaphor. Energy body is just a metaphor. There really isn't any energy. The light was just a metaphor. It's a tool to help us focus on the intent. Because if we just say, oh, I don't need any of those tools, okay, heal, you know, we're not really focused. That's almost a wish, but it's not a focused intent. There's a difference between a wish and a focused intent. And when we just, you know, click our fingers and say heal, most of us, that doesn't help us muster a focused intent at all. So we don't move anything, you know, consciousness doesn't change. Now, if you get good enough, if you're clever enough that you can focus your intent like that, then that's all you need to do. Okay, but that doesn't include most of us. So we need tools like light beams and dark spots and those kinds of things so that we can focus on what we're doing. And it matters that you know something. You see, now here's what you bring to the table. Let's say that you know some physiology and you know some biology. Okay, and you know that you know, there's a particular problem with this kind of cell, you know, maybe a cancer cell, the way it reproduces, that sort of thing. And if you know a little bit, you can go in and focus that energy on just that problem. You focus it on just taking that, you know, that polar molecule and turn it around this way. And that's all that's required to get something to flow through that membrane, you know, some kind of thing that way. If you have that knowledge, now you're focused on a very small thing, and you can get a lot more power on that small point. It's just like a magnifying glass. You know, you have a magnifying glass, the sun comes through a window, you can focus it to a hot, very hot point. You can burn things with that. Otherwise, that same sun comes through the window and it just feels warm on your back. You know, it doesn't burn anything. So the power of positive thinking is like the warm sun coming through. You can say, oh, I wish you feel better, you know, and you know, heal and that kind of stuff. And you may do something, but it's very general, it's very vague, and it's like the warm sun on your back. Whereas if you can get a focused intent, and if you focus that intent, remember when we did our healing, we focused in on the black spot, and then we did something on the whole energy body, make the whole energy body glow. Well, okay, that whole energy body glow is something that that body will use in any way it so desires. We're kind of just giving it energy. We're not specifying how that energy is used. And that will have an effect, but it's a broad effect. So instead of a sharp, high peak, we get a broad, long kind of peak. See, it's different. It has maybe the same energy under the curve, you know, same amount of area under the curve, but one of them is peaked up and very sharp and has a more impact. So that's the difference. So if we know something and we can focus more specifically, we actually have more of an effect than if we just have good wishes, good health, you know, hope you feel better. That works, that's helpful, but it's broad and not nearly as powerful. So the more knowledge we have of what we're doing, the better we can do it. So that's a good point to bring out.
When you, based on your map, you claim that you visited several other non-physical PMRs, let's say. Are those visits outside of our system? Are those visits more or less curiosity visits, or are there things outside of our system that you can take back and apply here or learn?
Well, there's sometimes they're curiosity visits, and there's sometimes business. Sometimes you have things that take you into those reality frames. Sometimes you run into things here that are from those reality frames that need to be sent back. So there's sometimes it's business that gets you to do that, but for the most part, it's just curiosity. You can't help it if you're a scientist. You just want to go see what's, you want to see what's over the hill, right as the song goes. You can't. You have a hard time not knowing whatever there is to know. So it's mostly curiosity. Sometimes not.
Some of those other realities probably have specific goal-oriented. What's the word I'm looking for? Would there be things that those realities are working on that really don't have anything to do with what our purpose is?
Yes, generally. I mean, like I say, they're similar and they're populated by beings who are trying to grow their quality. They're just doing it under different circumstances, different ways of solving a problem. Usually there's very little crosstalk, there's very little feedback. There's very little that you can bring from there to here that's going to be effective or going to be meaningful. It's like you're not going to bring technology there to here. You can't take leaps like that, like technological leaps. You can just see that they're doing things in different ways, and maybe it gives you some appreciation of different ways to approach problems, but that's about it. You bring back what affects you. So the experience there changes you, like any experience should, and you bring that back. So you come back changed from it, but it's not like you bring something back here, they have black potatoes there, and we just have white potatoes here. So you bring back some seeds. It doesn't work like that. Those realities stay there. When you're physical there, you can manifest bodies in those realities. When you're physical there, when you leave that stays. Things stay where they belong, in the reality frames where they belong. It's not that kind of mixing. Questions? Bound to be more questions.
Why does it seem like the society we live in is so anti-spiritual?
Pardon? Just say that?
The society that we live in here it seems so anti-spiritual. Like there's institutions and psychological conditions.
It does. And the society that you see here, that question was, why does the society that we see here seem so anti-spiritual? Mike is trying to pick up your audio on that shotgun mic, but you talk kind of softly. The reason it seems that way is because that's the way we are. Our reality reflects us. So you look at all the people that are on this planet, all 6 billion of them, and this is what we create. It's the level of our consciousness, the quality of the consciousness, the people that live here, is why it's like it is. And like I said the other night, this is not a graduate school. This is an elementary school. This is maybe even a daycare. So it's not that advanced. There's most of the consciousness here is struggling, trying just to understand the very basics, which means there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of ego. There's a lot of wants and needs, and that's what leads most of us around most of the time. That's what we're driven by. We're driven by our needs. People fall in need. They don't fall in love. That's just the way we are. And this is the society and the culture that we create because of it. So it's us. So if you want to create, if you want that culture, that environment we live in to dress up a little bit and be a little kinder and a little more loving and see bigger pictures, then the first thing you can do is just change yourself. because it's all kind of a vector sum of all of us. So if everybody changes themselves, then the whole thing goes up just a little bit. But you can't change it by preaching to it. You can't change it by screaming at it. You obviously can't change it by beating it. So about the only thing you can do is change yourself and try to provide an opportunity in which others find it easier to grow themselves. That's about all you can do. You can't force anybody to learn or understand anything, but you can provide an environment in which they get it, in which they do understand. So it's a long, slow process, and there's constantly new entities coming in at the beginning end. So, this is an elementary school. We get new students, and some old ones graduate, but basically it's a young group of consciousness here that is just trying to evolve. But that's where the biggest strides are. When you're learning things, when you're 2 years old, when you're 1 year old, just think how much you learn between the ages of 1 and 2. And between the ages of 2 and 3, your whole life changes 2 or 3 times in a year. Your whole perspective, everything you understand gets turned upside down, and old ideas disappear. You're learning at a tremendous rate. Between 55 and 56, how much do you learn? Where's what's the big range? Well, not quite so much. Well, that's the way it is with consciousness. So partly you have this kind of young consciousness thing because that's where the action is. That's where the potential for a lot of growth and learning is. And it may seem like nobody's learning much anything in this culture, but there's a lot of people growing up here, and the majority are struggling. It's just the way it is. So it's a mean-spirited place because we got a lot of mean-spirited people here, but they're all doing the best they can with what they've got at the time. So it's not like, you're superior and they're inferior because you understand and they don't. It's that you have more, if you understand, that just means your responsibility is higher. You've got more to contribute. You need to do better, because you understand. They don't, they're just scrounging around trying to do the best they can. And, it's like children. We allow our children a lot of slack because we know they don't understand. They say things that are inappropriate or embarrassing or something like that. Everybody just kind of chuckles and forgets it because they're kids. Well, it's sort of like that. You have to say people are who they are and what they are, and we have to hope that they all grow up and help them all grow up. And feeling superior because we understand is not part of the solution. That's not helpful at all. That's actually part of the problem.
Okay, we need to wrap it up.
Okay, we got one more. We had a hand in the air.
One last question.
Yeah.
I promise. There's a lot of reports of people claiming that in near-death experiences, they revisit all the important events that have happened in their life. Events. Is there a process in death or in a near-death experience? Is there a process that's in place that does this intentionally, and why would that?
Yeah, there is a process that does this intentionally, and these near-death experiences, a lot of them, and I think I'm going to say more about this tomorrow, but a lot of it is belief-based, like anybody's experience. It's their interpretation. The reason a near-death experience almost always has to go through a tunnel is because they have a belief that you can't get anywhere if you don't travel. That's just a belief, because in this reality frame, that's the way it is. If we don't travel, we stay where we are. So they get in this other reality, and in order to get there, they have to travel. Well, traveling through a tunnel gives them the sense of traveling, and then, they can be there. That's just a kind of a sop to the belief. There is no travel, there is no tunnel. Those are all metaphors to let us get by the beliefs that block us. So, that's the first thing. But now this thing about seeing all the lives and doing the review, yes, that is a process. And what they're doing is they're going back into these databases, and they're doing this with help. It's being done to them, if you will, or for them. And they're doing a life's review. You hear the old thing, the drowning man, the last few seconds, his life passes in front of his eyes and that sort of thing. That's true. You do a review, and after you have passed on, after you've died and you're in that larger reality where you're looking for what to do next, how to continue your growth, okay, you will end up meeting other entities, other beings, and they will help you with your decisions of what to do next, how you want to incarnate, where, under what circumstances, what you need to learn, and so on. And often when they say, well, you really had a lot of trouble with ego, and the person they're talking to goes, me? No, I didn't have any ego. I loved everybody. And they go, really? Watch this. And they start going back into that database, and they start showing this person, and that's what that database is used for. They go back through that historical database, and they show exactly what happened, what critical points were, the decisions that were made, the intents that were used. And that's a learning tool. And what that does is help bring people into reality, into what really did happen. Not what they imagined happened or hoped happened or the way they saw it at the time, but this is what happened. So all of those ideas about how good and perfect you were kind of melt when you actually see what you did and why you did it and what the point was. And you will get that. You'll get that review, because that helps you then understand really what you need to work on, the kind of situation you need to be in that'll give you challenges to outgrow that, and then you plan it. But this is now for more grown entities tend to do this. At the very beginning levels, entities jump in and jump out. There's no planning. They just need experience. They're just beginning consciousness. They just need to get experience. It's hard to judge what you should do next if you haven't ever done anything, So there's just a lot of that. The more you grow up, the more planning you do, the more review you do, the more you're liable to plan with other entities to involve with you. So it gets more and more specific. The more precise you are about the culture and the people that you get born to. You pick that out. You can be more specific. But there's a point where you're not specific at all. It doesn't matter. You just jump back into it. Anybody will do anywhere. You just want lots of varied experience, male, female, rich, poor, whatever. So yeah, the review is a process that you will go through, not necessarily just before you die, but certainly afterwards. You'll sit down and you'll see the whole picture, and there won't be anything left out. There's no way to hide. There's no way to kind of turn off the lights or get it in a brown bag so nobody notices. Everything is going to be there. Every intent, every thought, and why you did it, and what you did, and you'll have to come to terms with that. But it's good. It's not like that's a humiliating experience or anything. It isn't. It's like watching a movie, and that was that was the last chapter, and I see that, and I really need to work on that, and you see it, and you make plans, and they'll give you some suggestions, and there's a whole team, if you will, that's kind of the welcoming party, and they help you with the focus and how to plan for the next thing, and a lot of that is guided. Again, this larger consciousness system wants us to succeed, and it gives us all the tools we need to succeed, but we have to do it of our own free will. So yeah, the system's on our side. It helps, and that's why they do see that. That's a common thing where you go back and make all those connections.
What if you overcome a lot of the things you did that weren't that great during your life? Will that come in the review? That you'll say, well, I was foolish for half my life?
Oh yes, you get the whole thing. You get the whole thing. Basically, we physicists are fond of conservation laws. There's basically, there's the conservation of entropy in the world. There's a conservation of what you learn. If you overcome things, if you start out and you're foolish and then you grow up, well, then you're no longer foolish. The foolishness is just past, gone. You've grown up, you've outgrown it now, and you don't have to go back and revisit that because that's no longer you. So you die, and the next time you start from wherever you left. It's not like you have to start from scratch. You start from that level of growth where you were, and you go up. You plan from there and go on. The only way you go backwards is if you actually de-evolve. You do a lot of things, your intent is very negative, and you do things that make you more foolish. You go from being less foolish to more foolish. Then you have to make up that ground. You have to get yourself back out of that hole. So that's the So, yeah, no, you don't lose. Death doesn't wipe your slate clean as far as what you've learned. You don't always come back in. You don't come in as an idiot that doesn't know what to do and then have to get up to this point and then return to an idiot again. You get to the point where you know more, you're more evolved with your consciousness. You come back in with a clean slate as far as physical matter data goes, and you have to start accumulating that. But your soul, your spirit, your inner self, your consciousness, your quality is conserved. That's how you make progress. Otherwise, we just keep chasing our tail around and around. But there's a conservation of quality of your consciousness.